everyone, it's Misty, and sometimes you just need a quick and easy bag pattern, and I have one for you today. I can't wait to show you how to make it. Every once in a while, you just need a super simple bag pattern, and I have one for you today. This is the easy, everyday sling bag. Super simple to make, and I want you to remember as I show you this technique that you can do this with any size square. It's all based on squares. And so to make this, let me show you the supplies you're gonna need. First up, I chose a 1/2 yard of each of our fabrics. This is the outside and this is my lining. Both of these prints are from Flowerland by Melody Miller for Ruby Star Society. They're just really bold and fun. You're also going to need some fusible fleece, about 1/2 yard. So I have that here. Then if you're going to make your own handle, you're going to need these 1.5 inch rings. You'll need 4 total, and that's what comes in this pack. And then you can add an optional snap closure. There's also these great leather handles that are available from Miyako. It just adds a really fun detail if you're interested in that. So let's get started and I'll show you how to make it. Okay, to start off with, you are going to take both of your prints and we are going to cut a 13-inch strip by the width of fabric, and so that's what I've done here. And so now, what I like to do, because we need 3 squares of each of our fabrics to make this bag. And so I like to just kind of eyeball this and fold it in thirds. This does have a really wide selvage, so you just want to make sure when you're trimming this later that you're not going to cut into that. So I like to make sure I can see that side. And so I just fold it just like so and make sure my edges are lined up. And obviously you could just cut one at a time, but I just found this a great way to save some time. And stack them up just like that, and then we'll align it on our mat. And then I am looking for 13 inches. So I'll start by trimming off this side. And then coming over 13 inches, which will be right here. And trimming this off. All right, and so this is our waist, so we can just throw that away. And now we have 3 equal squares for the outside of our bag. Next up, we're gonna take that fusible fleece and we are gonna cut a strip of that that is a 1/2 inch smaller than your square. And so since this was 13, I've cut these at 12.5. And so now we're going to take the bumpy side of the fusible fleece and we're going to fuse this to the wrong side of each of our squares. So let's go over to the iron and do that. So I like to make sure my square is nice and flat at first. Sometimes you have some wrinkles in there from when it came off the bolt. So I'll just give this a good press. And then I'll put the bumpy side down. I like to just kind of eyeball it. It does kind of naturally stick to that fabric, and then I flip it over and press it from the fabric side. It doesn't have to be exact. We just want to make sure that the majority of that fleece is not going to be in our seam, because we don't want all that bulk in the seam. So I will go ahead and do the same thing to the other 2 squares, and I'll meet you back here. All right, so now I have fused that fusible fleece to the wrong side of each of my outside squares. I have those ready to go. And at this point, you could do some quilting details if you wanted to. I think this would look really cute with some crosshatch quilting. So this would be the step that you would do that. I just made the bag without adding any quilting, but I just wanted you to realize that it would be a fun detail. And so now we are going to put these 2, to begin with, right sides together, just like so, and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on these 2 corners that come together. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this to the machine, and I did back stitch at the start and sew off, and then sew the other way and back stitch, just so we had some good strength there in our seams. And I am just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So back stitch. Just take your time, make sure everything's staying lined up. All right, and then we will pivot and go down this other side. Okay, so we've sewn those two seams. Now you're going to open it up and you have like a hat shape. It's just a triangle and you probably think, oh no, what have I done? This is exactly right. This is how you want it to look. And so now we're going to fold this out. This is what I found to be the easiest because we need to line up on one of these sides. It doesn't matter which, just one of the, opposite sides that you've already sewn. And we're going to line up our other square. Just like this, so that again, we have right sides together. And so when you get to this middle here, it's actually going to overlap that first seam by 1/4 inch, which is what you're wanting. And then it's going to meet up with this point and come all the way down and overlap the seam on this side. So let's go ahead and sew with that 1/4 inch on both of those sides. Just want to really take your time, make sure it's all lined up, and that you don't have any of the bulk from your first square underneath where you're stitching. So I've taken a few stitches. Now we're good to go. Now we can line up this opposite side and sew straight down. Again, just taking time to adjust, make sure everything is lined up. All right, and so now when we flip this out, we have more of our bag shape. Let me turn that. See, it's starting to look more like what we're wanting. And so now we can set this aside for just a moment and we can move on to our lining. So our lining squares are cut the exact same size as our outside. So 13 inches. I have all 3 of these ready to go, and they go together almost exactly the same way. The only difference is we're going to leave about a 6 to 8 inch opening so that we can turn the bag right sides out in the end. So let's go ahead and start by sewing 2 together, just like we did before. And then we'll come back and we'll add that 3rd one, and on that one I'll leave the opening. So now we can turn this so we can see the right sides of our lining, and I'm going to line up this corner just like we did before. I'm going to use a few clips or pins this time just to remind myself to leave that opening. So on one side here, I'm just going to place a couple of clips. Again, remember this is going to intersect that other seam. That's exactly what you want. And we just want to have about that much space that we can turn this right sides out. So I'm going to go ahead and start at this other corner. Make sure that's lined up, and we'll sew all the way down and come to this first clip, back stitch, leave this opening, and finish off the other edge. skip down to here, move this clip out of the way, back stitch, and finish off the rest of this square. All right, and so now we have that lining ready to go. Again, just leaving that opening so that we can flip this out at the end. So you could technically slide this inside of the lining and stitch all the way around the top. Because of the fusible fleece I put on here, I find it easier to actually reverse that. So I'm going to turn this one inside out. And we're going to turn the lining right sides out. And I'm going to slide this so that my corners match up inside the bag. And then we are going to clip our center joints. They should line up exactly on both sides. And then our two peaks here at the top will match up, and the same thing on this other side. There we go. And so now we are going to take a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the top of this bag, and then we will turn it right sides out there at the end. So let's take this to the machine and do that. Move my bowl over here so I can put all of these away as I go. I always like to start at one of the points. And so we will back stitch, of course. And so all the way down. Just moving that pin out of the way as I get close to this center seam and make sure everything's staying as lined up as possible. And then I'm going to stop here and show you what I'm looking for under the needle, because I'm afraid you might not be able to see it. But right here, you can see where my two threads cross from when I sewed this lining together. And so as I'm coming and approaching that, I'm stopping right at that point, because that's where my 1/4 inch seam is. And I know if I stop there, then all of this is going to match up. And then from that point, I can, back stitch, tack it there, even just keep my needle down and pivot to continue all the way down. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do as I continue, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. So again, I'm putting my needle right in where those seams cross, and then we're just going to sew straight down this side. Just taking my time to adjust those layers of fabric. Again, looking for where those seams cross. Now I'm just going to leave my needle down, and then I can pivot this under the machine and sew up this other side. There we go. So one quick thing before we turn this right sides out, I do like to use my scissors and just trim off some of the bulk. Just that's going to help everything lay really nice. So we're just going to shave down a little bit at these points. Just making sure that we have plenty of seam there still. Just getting rid of some extra fabric. And then I do like to take one tiny snip on this inside curve, and then I kind of shave this fabric back as well. Just a tiny bit goes a long way. There we go. And the same thing on this other side. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and trim off a little bit on these bottom corners as well. We just want everything to lay really nice. Just make sure you're not getting too close to those seams. All right, there we go. So now we can reach inside here and we're looking for that opening that we left. And we can turn our bag right sides out by pulling it through that. Just be gentle. We did back stitch, so it should be okay for you to pull this all the way through. There we go. It's starting to take shape. So I like to get in here with my finger and just push out all of these corners before I push the lining back down inside. Just make sure everything's laying the way that I want. Because if you needed to, make any adjustments or change your seams, you would want to do that obviously before you close up your lining. So I think that's looking really good. And so now we can fold our lining inside. And we're going to take this over to the ironing board, and we're just going to roll this so that the edge lays inside, the lining fabric is inside, and then we'll come back and we'll top stitch this and then close up our lining. And so we're just going to press this really good so it lays nice first. All right, so we have that all pressed in place, and now we can just come back about an 1/8 inch or whatever you prefer from this top edge to do that top stitching, to just kind of give this beautiful finished edge. And so let's go ahead and do that. With top stitching, I don't like to start right at a corner. I like to start kind of in between. I just find it to be easier. And so I'm just going to use the width of this presser foot that I have on the machine as my guide and lengthen that stitch length just a little bit. Go ahead and back stitch once, and then we will go all the way around the top of this bag. All right, I'm going to keep my needle down at the corner and just pivot. right, we have completed all of the top stitching around our bag. It just gives it a nice finished edge. And so now we can go back and close up our opening. And so I like to, you have two options here. So you could do like a blind stitch by hand, and then if you do that, this bag is fully reversible. And so that's kind of a fun option if you want to just, stitch this closed. But I'm going to go ahead and close it on the machine just for time. And so I'm actually going to take this to the ironing board really quick because it's easier if you just allow that natural seam allowance that's created from those other seams to just roll under. So we'll just give that a little press so that it lays nice and flat. And then I can just sew from here to here with a very small stitch to close that up. So I do need to make sure I turn my stitch length back down because I had lengthened it for that top stitching. So I'm just going to sew close to that edge. There we go. Now that is all closed up, and we can just shove that back inside the bag. And so now let's talk about the handle, because remember I told you I would show you how to make a fabric version as well as this great leather version. Let me just show you how this one works. It's really cool because the fabric version is going to work much the same way. And so it has these two rings, and you're just going to slip your fabric through both of the rings, and then it's going to go between the first and the second ring, and it kind of just creates this little, I don't even know what you call that, but it's very secure in there, which is super cool. And then same thing on the other side, through both of the rings, and it flips back over to go inside the other loop. And then it creates this great little handle. I forgot to tell you, if you wanted to add that snap closure, you would do it prior to putting your lining together. It would go on your lining fabric. I didn't put a snap closure because I liked the idea of it being reversible. And so that way I can, use either side because both of these fabrics are so cute. So now let's show you how to make this same concept out of a fabric handle. So remember, we only cut 13 inches off of our half-yard cut of fabric. So you've got some inches left there on the side. And from that extra fabric, we are going to cut the pieces for our handle. And so I am using my lining fabric for this. You'll have plenty of the outside. You can choose. Maybe you even want your handle to be reversible. Just play with it. Have fun. And so I cut two rectangles that measure 14 inches by 1 3/4 inches. So 1 3/4 by 14. And I have these ready to go here. And then from our fusible fleece, we're going to cut two pieces that are 1 inch by 11 inches. So I have those ready to go. And then we're going to flip these to the wrong side, and we're just going to center this up. And if it helps to have this on a mat, it should be about 1.5 inches from each edge, and just slightly more than 1/4 inch from each side. And so we're going to just center that on here, and we're going to press this to the wrong side of both of our rectangles. So let's take this to the ironing board. Same idea. I like to just center it up and then flip it over and press it from the fabric side. And there's one. And we'll do the same thing with this one. All right, these are ready to go now. And so we're going to place these rectangles right sides together, and I'm going to sew all the way around this outside edge, leaving about, 3 to 4 inches open in the middle. And so let's go ahead and do that. You can put pins in there if you need to, but I'm just going to remember. So I'll start here. Okay. All right, we're going to back stitch and then go all the way to this corner. You can sew off or pivot, whatever you prefer. I tend to just sew off. right, we're coming back to that last side, so remember to leave an opening. And we will back stitch. Okay, perfect. So just like we got rid of some bulk on our bag, we're going to do the same thing here with this. We're just going to trim off these little corners and shave this down just a bit so that this will turn nicely for us. Again, a little bit goes a long way. You don't want those seams to be too narrow. All right, and one more here. Here we go. All right. So now we can turn this right sides out. And it just takes a little bit of maneuvering. If you have a chopstick or something, sometimes that is helpful. So I will go ahead and get this all flipped right sides out, and I'll meet you back here. Okay. All right, so we have this all flipped right sides out, and I've gone ahead and given it a press and turned our little edges under. And so now we're going to top stitch just like we did on the top of our bag with about an 1/8 inch away all the way around, and that's going to catch this opening here and enclose our whole strap. So let's go ahead and take this to the machine. You could lengthen your stitch length here if you wanted. Because it's a handle, I'm keeping mine short. I just want it to be really sturdy. It's starting to shift on me, so I'm just going to realign those sides. Down and pivot and continue all the way around. All right, so now we have all of our top stitching done all the way around our handle. It's ready to go. And so we're going to grab that package of 1.5 inch rings. And we are going to need 2 for each side. And we are just going to stack them up. And because of how we did this, we don't have that fusible fleece in the ends, which makes this easier to loop over our rings. And so we're just going to loop them over just like that. And then right where we did our top stitching originally, it should fold back about 1 inch. And we will just top stitch all the way across there on both sides. So let's go ahead and do that. And I found this gave me plenty of room to still get my presser foot in here and sew across and keep the rings out of the way. Just make sure it's all lined up. There we go. There's the first side. Pretty easy. We'll flip this around and do the same thing on the other side. I'm just looping that fabric through. You can really feel where that fusible fleece stops, and that tells you how far back to fold this. And then we will sew straight across. Just remember to backstitch. Alrighty, there we go. Now our fabric handle is complete. So just like I showed you on this leather one, it works the exact same way. So we can take this one off and slide this one on. So the fabric will just slip through and secure in those rings. I just think it's a fun detail for this bag. and really unique. You don't see this kind of handle on a lot of things. If you decide you want to make multiple sizes of this bag using different size squares, you can use the same handle. You don't even have to make another one because you can just slip this out so it serves multiple purposes, which is super fun. I think it's great to take to the farmer's market or grocery shopping, or just, load up your kids' toys wherever you're headed. It's a super versatile and fun bag, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now I have a special treat. If you're joining us from One Big Happy, I'm going to show you how to line your knitted version of this bag. All right, if you are joining me from One Big Happy, welcome. I'm Misty. It's so nice to meet you, and I'm really glad you're here. You should have a knitted bag that looks something like this that Jenny has walked you through. For my viewers, if you have not checked out Jenny Fish's tutorials over at One Big Happy, we will link you below, and you can learn how to make a knitted version of your very own. Let me show you how to line this with fabric. It just gives this bag a little bit more body and stability. Here's one that I've added the lining to, and I think it's super fun. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin with, you're going to want to pick a fabric, and I chose this line. It's called Thicket and Bramble from Figo Fabrics. It's just this beautiful floral that matches these yarn colors perfectly. You're going to grab a 1/2 yard of that, and you're also going to grab a 1/2 yard of fusible fleece. And so this is fusible fleece. It looks like normal craft fleece, but the back side has an adhesive, like bumps on it, which is really great. And so from your yardage of fabric, you are going to cut 3 12-inch squares, and that's the size that's going to match up to Jenny's pattern. And so it's going to look just like this. I'm going to go ahead and press this with the iron so it lays nice and flat. And then my fusible fleece is going to be cut a 1/2 inch smaller than my fabric. So that was 12-inch square. This is 11.5. And that bumpy side is going to go to the wrong side of my fabric. And so I'm just going to kind of make sure that this is centered in here. Should look something like this. You just have about a 1/4 inch all the way around. That's what you're looking for. And then now we can carefully flip this over and press it from the fabric side. And that heat of the iron will activate the glue of the fusible fleece. There we go. And so your squares will look like this. You'll have 3 of them. And just like you assembled your knitted bag, and just like I taught earlier in this video, you're going to sew those 3 squares together, and it's going to look something like that. So if you need a refresh on how to do that on a sewing machine, you can go back and watch from the beginning. But I'm going to show you now how to add this facing so that we can line the inside of the knitted bag. So our 2 1.5 inch strips that we have here, we are going to go ahead and we're going to place those right sides together like this. So I'm going to make sure that the selvage is out of the way because we don't want to catch that in the seam. And then you can use a straight edge, any ruler, and I'm going to lay corner to corner where the fabric intersects, and we're going to just use a pin and draw a line. Just like so. And we're going to sew right on that line. So if you need to put a pin or something in here to hold that fabric together, you can. But I'm just going to pinch it really good and take this to the machine. And then we're going to sew right on that drawn line, remembering to back stitch at the start and the stop. There we go. And so from here, you can use your scissors or a rotary cutter if you have one, and we will just trim off our extra fabric, just like so. And then we will press this back so we have one continuous strip of fabric. So let's go ahead and just press this little seam. It's going to look just like that. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn this right sides out just to make it a little bit easier for me. So we're going to push that in like that. And then starting along one of these straight edges, we're going to leave a good tail on our fabric of about 5 or 6 inches. And then I'm going to start about right here And so with a 1/4 inch seam on the machine, and I will pivot at the corner and go all the way around. So let me walk you through this. So right where my thumb is, I'm just going to go ahead and place this under the machine. So there is a line here that indicates the 1/4 inch seam. That's what I'm following. And so I'll go ahead and take a few stitches and then back stitch. And then we are going to come to the corner. All right. And then now we can fold this back so it creates this kind of 45-degree corner. And then we're going to line the fabric up to go back the other direction. So it's just meeting up with our lining fabric. And so then we can place this back under the machine, back stitch, and we'll sew down. Just want to make sure that you don't get any of those extra layers in your way as you're going. And as you get to this bottom corner, I just get as close as I can to the center, and then I'm just going to pull this other corner straight, just like so, and keep my strip lined up with that. And we're going to continue all the way around. All right, let me show you how to do this corner one more time. So as we're approaching, I'm just eyeballing, and when I get the needle about a 1/4 inch away from this edge of the fabric here, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to back stitch, and then I can turn this and fold my fabric back. It creates this 45-degree angle, and then I'll fold it so it lines up this corner and this corner of the fabric. And so then we can just turn and start sewing down the other side. Finish this out, and I'll meet you back here when it's done. Okay, I'm coming back to that first side where I've left this fabric tail, remember? And so I need to leave about 6 inches of space here for me to finish off these ends. And so I'm just going to come a couple more inches here and back stitch. And so now you can see I've got this little bit of a tail here and this tail here. And so how this is going to work, this is kind of the trickiest part, so I will try to make sure you can see. It's not hard, you just need a little guidance as you go. And so I'm going to go ahead and trim off this selvage end just a little bit here, and just nice and straight. And then I'm going to lay the width of that strip on top of this one. And then I'm going to fold this other strip across, and I'm going to trim this straight with this edge of the in-between strip. So just to reiterate, I've cut this one straight. I'm laying the width of the strip here, aligned with that edge, folding this one over the top, and we're going to trim this one off straight. There we go. All right, So now we can remove this. And so what this does, it allows us to have just enough overlap that I can turn this so that they're right sides together. And just like we drew that 45 line to connect the strips initially, we're going to do the same thing here. And so we can take our ruler or straight edge, and we're just going to lay this on here. And sometimes this is an instance because you don't have a lot of extra fabric, it just takes a little practice and patience. And so we just want to make sure that the straight edge is lined up here with this corner and that they're not shifting. And so if you need to put a pin in there or a clip, I'm going to use a clip just to hold this outside edge and keep it from shifting. And then I can come back here with my ruler and it just takes a little bit of maneuvering. And we are going to line up our ruler from corner to corner, just like so. And we're going to draw a line. And we are going to sew right on that line. And that's going to connect our pieces together. So now we can take this, and honestly, I find the clip to be in the way once I start stitching. And so I'm just going to move that out of the way. We're just going to keep that lined up and pinched, and the rest of it out of the way. We're going to put our presser foot down and our needle right in line with that line that we drew. Just make sure it's all straight and back stitch, and then sew all the way across. There we go. And so now, how you know if you got it right is when you pull this over here, it will lay straight, just like that. And so that's what we're looking for. So now we can come back and trim off this excess. And so we will clip that off, just like so. And now we can come back to the machine and finish off sewing across the top here. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So now our facing is attached all the way around the top of our lining section. And so now we're just going to take this to the iron, and we are going to fold this back all the way around and press it so that it lays nicely. When you get to this bottom point here, you might need to take a few little snips. And so let me show you what I did. We are just going to snip right up from that bottom point and then come up another, I don't know, inch or so, and just cut a few little notches. And that's going to help all of this roll under nicely. So we'll do the same thing on the other side. Just make sure you're not getting right up next to the seam, because you want to make sure you have some fabric to still flip. But this will allow it to kind of overlap and fold around that inside corner. All right, there we go. And so now I can just roll my fabric back, because I want that seam to be exactly on top. And so I always start with my fingers, and then I can hit this with the iron and go all the way around. When you get to the corner like this, it will fold in and then over, and it will look nice and neat on that little corner because of how we attached the fabric to it. And so let's go ahead and press this, and I'll meet you back here when it's all done. All right, so our facing is attached. You can see how I have pressed that down right along that seam line, and I went ahead and turned it wrong sides out because that's how it's going to go into our knitted bag. And so this is ready to go. And so now we can take our knitted bag and we can slide this inside, and we'll start by matching up these bottom corners. And so I like to just slide my hand all the way in there and grab that bottom corner, and then come over to the opposite side. And make sure that is all lined up. And then as we straighten this out, the bag has that natural stretch that is going to line up with our lining. And one of the beautiful things about this knitted version is that stretch. So we wanted to accommodate some of that in the lining, which is why it's just a little bit bigger than your knitted bag. And so I'm going to put some clips in here. If you have pins, that would totally work. I'm just clipping together the lining and the knitted portion. And I like to make sure, whoops, I just broke that clip. I like to make sure that the knitting is hanging over just a little bit from the lining. And the reason that I do that is Jenny's going to show you how to add that handle and the closure. And so you need to be able to attach a few stitches to this edge here. So you want to make sure that it's hanging off your lining. And so we are going to just put a few pins in here or clips and just keep everything lined up as we go. And we'll make our way all the way around this bag, and then I'll meet you back here to sew it down. All right, I have this all clipped in place. Our lining is ready to go. And so you can kind of decide if you prefer to have your lining out or the knitted portion out. I actually do like to have the lining out so I can see the edge of that fabric and make sure I'm catching it under the machine. So that's why it's helpful to clip this all the way around, because now we can flip it wrong sides out. And I'm just gonna follow. I actually had no trouble sewing this on the machine, and the thread just disappears into that yarn. I think it's a really beautiful way to finish this off. You could hand stitch all of this in if you wanted, but I recommend giving the sewing machine a try. So I'm going to take off my table and set this out of the way just so I have a little bit more working room. And then we can bring this over to the machine. And again, we want to make sure a little bit of that knitted bag is peeking through, and we'll lift our presser foot. And I like to just line my presser foot up right with the edge of this fabric. And because we're dealing with some bulk here, you can lengthen your stitch length a little bit. And then we are just going to sew all the way around. So back stitch to start, and just follow with the edge of that fabric, removing the clips as you go. And leave our needle down and pivot. And I'm just going to continue in this way all the way around the bag, and I'll meet you back here when it's done. All right, we have sewn all the way around our bag. Our lining is now fully attached, and we have this beautiful, no seams, finished bag. And so now, for my viewers, you saw me show this great leather handle. I want to show that it also works with this knitted bag. So you can just fold this through your loops. It is a little bit more bulky than just the fabric, but you can totally do it. So we're just going to pinch that in there and make sure it slides, and then do the same thing on the other side. And pull that through, just like so. So fun. I love that. So for those of you at One Big Happy, you can bounce back over with Jenny and she'll show you how to make that knitted closure and the knitted version of the handle. But I hope you guys enjoyed seeing both of these versions of this everyday sling bag. Hey everyone, it's Misty. Thanks for watching at home. If you aren't already a part of our Missouri Star family, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want a notification every time we release a new video. I'll see you next Monday on the newest episode of At Home.